My daughter-in-law washed the bed sheets every single morning for 6 months. I just like things clean, Mom, she said. Then one afternoon, I walked into that room and found the mattress soaked in blood. My son stood in the doorway and whispered, Mom, I'm sorry I hid it from you. The washing machine in the basement had become the metronome of my entire household. Every morning at 6:15, before the kettle even started to whistle, I heard it thump, thud, thump, echoing up through the floorboards of the house. For 6 months since the wedding, my daughter-in-law Clara had washed those sheets every single day without fail. White cotton, slate gray duvets, embroidered pillowcases, all of it cycled through that machine like a ritual she couldn't skip. I told myself it was newlywed nerves. Clara was 27, soft-spoken, almost apologetic in the way she moved through a room, like she was afraid of taking up too much space. She was the kind of woman who said sorry when someone else bumped into her. But quiet routines, I would learn, often hide the loudest terrors. That Tuesday morning, I caught her in the hallway, arms wrapped around a bundle of white linen, pressed against her chest like she was smuggling something out of the house. Clara, I said, gently, stepping out from the kitchen doorway. She froze, mid-step, her shoulders rising toward her ears. When she turned, the smile came too fast, too practiced, and it never once touched her eyes, which were ringed, violet and hollow from what looked like weeks of no sleep. Why do you wash them every day, sweetheart? I asked, keeping my voice light. Careful. You're going to wear the fabric down to nothing. Her knuckles went white around the bundle. I just like things clean, Mom. She called me Mom the way a person reaches for a railing on a staircase in the dark. Not affection. Bracing. Before I could ask anything else, a shadow shifted at the top of the stairs. My son, Daniel, stood there, one hand pressed hard against the oak banister, like standing upright had become, somehow, a full-time job. Daniel had always been broad-shouldered, loud laughing, the kind of presence that filled a room before he even spoke, but something had hollowed out his face over the last few months, and his wedding band, I noticed, now slid loose over his knuckle. You eating, Danny? I asked, and I heard the old maternal alarm rising in my own throat. He gave me a ghost of his old grin. Still trying to fatten me up, Mom? I'm 30 years old, just stressed with the company, that's all. Below him, Clara stared down at her slippers and said nothing at all. I should tell you who I am, because it matters for what comes next. My name is Evelyn Whitman. I was 58 years old that autumn, living in a house my husband liked to call the Whitman Estate in Albemarle County, Virginia. To most of the people in our social circle, I was simply Harold's wife. Quiet, agreeable, decorative. What almost none of them knew, what Harold himself had long since chosen to forget, was that I had spent 22 years as a forensic accountant for the federal government. Before I ever took his name, I had read balance sheets the way other women read novels. I had testified in federal court. I had learned a long time ago that the loudest person in a room is rarely the most dangerous one. That afternoon, Clara took the sedan to the pharmacy, and Daniel was supposedly resting. I went upstairs, only meaning to open the windows to air out the bleach smell that seemed to follow Clara everywhere now. I pushed open the mahogany door, and the bed was stripped bare down to the mattress. I stopped breathing. Dark stains, rust-colored, bloomed across the center of that mattress, soaked so deep into the fibers that no amount of scrubbing, no amount of bleach, no amount of 6 a.m. laundry cycles could ever have made it disappear. Mom! The voice behind me was paper thin. I turned. Daniel stood in the doorway, trembling, his skin the color of old parchment. His collar slipped sideways to reveal a constellation of bruises along his collarbone. What happened to you? I said, rushing to him, hands hovering, afraid to touch him. Who did this? No one hit me, Mom. His eyes closed. A single tear slid free. Clara appeared behind him in the hallway, and when she saw me standing over that ruined mattress, the pharmacy bag slipped straight out of her hands. Pill bottles rolled across the hardwood, high-dose painkillers, anti-nausea medication, rolls of sterile gauze, and tangled in the plastic handles, a discarded hospital admission bracelet. It's cancer, Daniel whispered, looking at the floor. Stage 4. The floor tilted under me. Everything went to static. Clara grabbed my wrists, her hands ice cold. He made me promise not to tell you. He said it would kill you to watch him die. I looked at my only son, dying in a room above the kitchen where I had spent months worrying about nothing more than the water bill. I dropped to my knees, and as I did, a folded paper slid loose from the pharmacy bag. A hospital billing statement. Daniel's name was not on it as the guarantor. The name printed at the top, beside a note about a canceled insurance policy, was Harold Whitman, my husband. Something in my chest, formless and grieving a moment earlier, hardened into something with an edge and a direction. Harold came home past 7 that night, smelling of bourbon and cedar cologne, laughing at something with my sister-in-law Veronica beside him. They had apparently been at the office all day. day, which lately meant nothing more than draining Daniel's company before my son was even in the ground. I sat at the head of the dining table, the chandelier dark, the hospital bill flat under my palm. Daniel has cancer, I said. My voice did not shake at all. Harold's hand froze on his tie. Veronica's smile flickered, then returned, sharper. Prominent families handle these matters privately, Evelyn, Veronica said, waving a hand. You canceled his insurance, I said. Harold leaned back, steepling his fingers, cold as a liquidator reading a balance sheet. The company couldn't carry dead weight, Evelyn. We have shareholders, dead weight. My son, the son who had taken Harold's failing supply chain business and built it into something worth millions. Veronica poured herself a Merlot. He signed the transfer papers himself, relinquished his shares to Harold. You told me it was temporary, came a voice from the hallway, weak but carrying, like a gunshot through the room. Daniel stood there, leaning on Clara, wrapped in a wool blanket, his eyes locked on his father. I'm protecting assets you're too weak to hold on to, Harold said, standing, buttoning his vest. Clara stepped in front of Daniel, trembling, small against Harold's frame, and said, You cornered me in that hospital corridor. You told me if I told Mom, you'd cut off his chemotherapy funding. You said you'd let him die in a public ward. Harold slammed his palm on the table, hard enough to rattle the crystal. They believed that night that I had folded. They believed, wrongly, that a quiet woman was a defeated one. For the next 9 days, I said almost nothing. I made ginger tea for Daniel, sat beside his bed, and every night, after Harold's scotch put him under, I moved through his study like a shadow, my fingers, still carrying the muscle memory of 22 years auditing corporate fraud, worked through his unsecure desktop. I found the original transfer document and ran it against an old tax return. The signature was a mechanical copy, forged while Daniel was sedated after his second round of chemotherapy. I traced the medical reimbursement account, the exact fund meant to pay for Daniel's treatment, and followed it offshore, then back through a shell company called Vanguard Strategic Consulting. No employees, no office, no clients. The sole beneficiary, listed plainly, was Veronica Whitman. By the 7th day, I had made 3 calls. The first to Daniel's oncologist, invoking my status as secondary emergency contact, securing sworn documentation that his diagnosis had been deliberately concealed from the hospital's financial office. The second to a patient rights litigation attorney in Charlottesville. The third to Martin Hale, the trust attorney who had drafted the Whitman Family Trust 20 years earlier. A man Harold liked to call a dusty little mouse with a briefcase and believed wrongly had retired to Florida. He hadn't, and when I showed him the ledger, the mouse was more than willing to show his teeth. On the 9th day, I found an email, deleted but not gone, from Harold to Veronica, sent weeks after Daniel's diagnosis. The kid is fading faster than expected, it read. Initiate the Vanguard invoices. We need total control before the funeral. They had not simply targeted a dying man. They had targeted the wrong woman entirely. Harold announced a family dinner for the 10th night to discuss, he said, future arrangements. I was not angry, sitting there at that table. Anger is heat. What I felt was something colder and far more useful. Harold raised his wine glass and announced he was putting the house on the market by month's end. Veronica leaned across the table, patted my hand, and told me they'd already scouted a small condo for me in the suburbs, easier for a widow to manage. Clara stood so fast, her chair scraped violently against the floor. Daniel closed his eyes. Dad, please, stop. Harold lifted his glass higher. To necessary changes. I did not raise mine. I looked at my husband, and for the first time in 10 days, I smiled. Yes, Harold, I said, to new beginnings. The doorbell rang, right on cue, echoing through the foyer like something tolling. I walked to the door myself and opened it onto a small army. My litigation attorney, 2 uniformed officers, an investigator from the state's medical fraud division, and standing quietly at the back, holding his hat in both hands, Martin Hale. Veronica's wine glass slipped from her fingers when I led them into the dining room, shattering against the marble, red wine pooling like something spilled. What is the meaning of this? Harold demanded, his chair tipping backward as he stood. Good evening, Harold, Martin said. I dropped a heavy red folder directly onto Harold's dinner plate. This is what happens, I said, when a father steals the money meant to keep his son alive. I walked them through it, tab by tab, my voice level, echoing off the walls with a precision that came from 2 decades of testimony. The forged signature, the canceled insurance, run alongside a phantom executive policy still billed to the company. The shell company with Veronica's name on every filing. You have no proof, Harold said, pointing a shaking finger at me. I am the CEO. The investigator stepped forward, badge in hand. Mr. Whitman, we have certified bank records, internal email emails, sworn statements from hospital administration, and the altered medical proxy documents. The paper trail is absolute. Harold turned on Daniel. Tell them you agreed to the transfer. Tell them. Daniel looked up, his body wasted by disease, and something unshakable settled into his hollow eyes. No, he whispered. One word. It severed everything. Harold lunged, hands reaching, and the officers moved fast, tackling him against the sideboard, handcuffs ratcheting shut. For the first time in 40 years of marriage, I watched real terror cross my husband's face. You can't do this to me, he spat. I built this family. I stepped close enough that only he could hear it. I already did, Harold. Martin read from the trust document, his voice steady, that any proven act of fraud against a beneficiary triggered immediate removal of the acting trustee, that the house remained mine, that Daniel's shares reverted to a protected medical trust, that Veronica's accounts were frozen pending recovery. Veronica dropped to her knees on the marble, sobbing, begging, please, Evelyn, we're family. I looked at her, then at my son's exhausted face, then at Clara's raw, red hands, worn down from months of washing blood out of sheets to protect me from a truth she never should have had to carry alone. Family protects the dying, I said. You circled him like vultures. Harold was arrested that night, dragged out through the front doors, while the neighbors watched from their porches. Veronica followed 3 days later, intercepted a Dulles trying to empty a frozen offshore account. Daniel came home under hospice care instead of secrecy, the curtains thrown open, sunlight filling a room that had spent 6 months in shadow. Clara never washed those sheets alone again. I helped her every morning, and some mornings we simply stood in the laundry room and cried together, and other mornings Daniel called down some terrible joke just to hear his wife laugh. He lived 4 more months, 4 months of grace without fear. On his final morning, the rain tapped softly against the window. He held Clara's hand in his left, mine in his right, and he told me he was sorry for hiding it, for trying to protect me from something he thought I couldn't survive. You didn't hurt me, I told him. You gave me something to fight for when I had forgotten how. He smiled faintly and slipped away a few minutes later, surrounded by the women who loved him. A year after, the Whitman Foundation opened its first legal aid office in Charlottesville, dedicated to families fighting insurance fraud and medical coercion. Clara runs the intake desk now. A photograph from her wedding day sits on the corner of it, Daniel smiling beside her. Harold received 12 years for embezzlement and medical fraud. Veronica received 8. She still writes me letters from prison asking for forgiveness, asking for money. I feed every one of them into the shredder in my office. Unopened, they had confused my silence for weakness. Those are not the same thing. I needed them to understand what they had done, not be told. Understand. Some grief never leaves you. It doesn't shrink and it doesn't fade. It simply changes shape until it learns to sit quietly on the bench beside justice. I still live in that house. Every morning, before the kettle boils, I walk upstairs and open the door to Daniel's room and pull back the curtains and let the light spill across the floor. The room is empty, but the bed is always made, and the sheets are always flawlessly clean. If you like the story, please like and subscribe.